I'm Daisy, 34 female. I live in a quiet condo downtown, a place I bought with my own hard-earned money from my career as a financial portfolio manager. It's my sanctuary, the one place in the world where my value isn't questioned and my successes aren't treated as insults. For my entire life, I've been the responsible one, the quiet achiever, but in the eyes of my family, I was nothing more than a convenient resource and the designated failure, no matter what the reality was. This is the story of how one cruel birthday joke, built on a lifetime of disrespect, pushed me to finally reclaim not just my dignity, but the very roof over their heads. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My birthday has always been less of a celebration and more of an obligation. A mandatory gathering at my mother Imogen's house, the house my father left her, the house I helped maintain. Every year, it was the same script. My brother, John, 4 years my senior and eternally the golden child, would hold court. His wife, Megan, a lifestyle blogger whose life seemed to be curated for social media perfection, would offer backhanded compliments that felt like tiny, sharp cuts. My mother, Imogen, would flutter around them, her pride in John so blinding it cast a permanent shadow over me. And then there was my nephew, Dylan, John's 10-year-old son, who was quickly learning that disrespecting Aunt Daisy was not only acceptable but encouraged. This year, my 34th birthday, felt different. I just closed a major account at work, a career-defining moment that came after months of relentless effort. I felt a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, this achievement would finally be enough to earn a sliver of genuine respect. I arrived at the house with a sense of cautious optimism, carrying a bottle of expensive champagne I'd bought to celebrate. As I walked in, the familiar scene greeted me. John was recounting a sales story, his voice booming through the living room. Megan was taking a selfie, angling her phone to capture the candid, family moment. My mother was beaming at her son, hanging on his every word. No one said happy birthday when I entered. They just nodded as if I were a late caterer. I placed the champagne on the counter and forced a smile. Hi, everyone. Imogen turned to me, her smile tightening slightly. Oh, Daisy, you're here. We were just hearing about John's incredible month. He's on track to be the top director in his entire region. That's great, John, I said, trying to sound enthusiastic. He just grunted in acknowledgement, not even bothering to look at me. The afternoon droned on. The conversation revolved entirely around John's career, Megan's online partnerships, and Dylan's budding soccer talent. I was an observer, a ghost at my own party. I tried to interject a few times, to share a bit about my own life, but my words were always spoken into a void, quickly swallowed by a louder, more important story from John or Megan. The tradition I dreaded most was gift-giving. It was never about the gifts themselves, but the performance. My gifts to them were always carefully chosen and expensive, a desperate attempt to buy their affection. Their gifts to me were always an afterthought, a joke. One year it was a self-help book titled How to Be More Charismatic. Another, it was a cheap gym membership with a note that said, Time to work on yourself. I knew this year would be no different, but I still held onto that foolish sliver of hope. After a dinner where I mostly pushed food around my plate, Imogen clapped her hands. Time for presents, she announced, her eyes sparkling as she looked at John. Dylan ran into the room holding a small, sloppily wrapped box. He thrust it at me. From all of us, he said, a smirk already playing on his lips. I knew that smirk. It was a smaller version of his father's. I took the box, my hands trembling slightly. It felt light, almost empty. I slowly unwrapped it, the cheap paper tearing easily. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, was a small plastic trophy, the kind you buy at a party store for $1. Engraved on the plaque at the bottom were the words, Participant. I stared at it, the single word a summary of how they saw my entire existence. I was not a winner, not a contender, just a participant, in their lives, in the world. I looked up and they were all watching me, their faces alight with amusement. John was chuckling into his hand. Megan had her phone out, probably recording my reaction for her hilarious family moments content. My mother's smile was painfully bright, as if this were the most delightful prank imaginable. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. The silence in the room was heavy, broken only by John's muffled laughter. He thought it was the funniest thing in the world. To him, my entire life, my efforts, my successes, they were all a joke, worthy of a cheap plastic trophy. And as I sat there, holding this symbol of their contempt, I had no idea that the evening was about to get so much worse. This wasn't the punchline. This was just the setup. The main event, the one that would shatter everything, was still to come. The small, insignificant trophy was a prelude to an act of cruelty, so profound, it would sever the last thread of connection I had to these people. I should have left then. I should have stood up, dropped the plastic trophy on the floor, and walked out without a word. But a lifetime of conditioning, of seeking their approval, kept me glued to my seat. I forced a brittle smile, the muscles in my face protesting. "Very funny," I managed to say, my voice sounding hollow and distant to my own ears. My attempt to play along only seemed to fuel their amusement. John finally let his laughter out, a loud, barking sound that filled the room. "See, she gets it. It's just a bit of fun, Daisy. You've got to learn to laugh at yourself." Megan chimed in, her voice dripping with condescending sweetness. "It's a term of endearment, really. We love that you always try so hard." Even my mother, Imogen, patted my arm. "Don't be so sensitive, dear. It's just your brother's way." Their words were a familiar chorus, a gaslighting symphony I had been listening to for decades. "You're too sensitive. It's just a joke. Can't you take a joke?" I placed the trophy on the coffee table, a monument to my humiliation, and decided to pivot. I still had one more card to play, one final, desperate attempt to connect with them on my own terms. "Well," I began, forcing my voice to be steady, "I actually got myself something for my birthday this year, something I've wanted for a long time." I reached into my bag and pulled out a small, elegant box from a well-known local artist. Inside was a handcrafted silver locket, intricately engraved with a tiny, detailed world map. It was beautiful and deeply personal. I had saved for it for months. "I've always wanted to travel more," I explained, my voice softening. "This is a promise to myself, to see the world, to not just be a participant." I let the last word hang in the air, hoping the meaning would land. For a moment, there was silence. Megan leaned forward, her eyes narrowing on the locket. I could see the flicker of envy, the appraisal. It was clearly expensive, clearly tasteful. For a split second, I thought I had done it. I thought I had shown them a piece of my soul they couldn't mock. I was wrong. John scoffed, breaking the spell. "A locket? What are you, 12? And what's with the map? You barely leave your condo. The only place you're going is to the office and back." Dylan, who had been watching the exchange with rapt attention, saw his opening. He had learned from the masters of cruelty. He snatched the locket from my hand before I could even react. "It's stupid," he shouted, his voice high and shrill. "It's a stupid, boring gift." He held it up like it was a dead insect. "Dylan, give that back," I said, my voice rising with panic. This wasn't a cheap trophy. This was mine. This was meaningful. "Dad, can we put it in the fire?" Dylan asked, turning to John with a hopeful grin. The evening was chilly and my mother had a fire crackling in the hearth, a feature she was immensely proud of. My blood ran cold. "John, no," I said, my voice a sharp command. "Tell him to give it back to me. Now." John leaned back on the couch, a lazy, malicious smile spreading across his face. He looked from me to his son. "I don't know, Daisy. He's got a point. It is pretty boring. Maybe a little fire would make it more exciting." Megan giggled, pulling out her phone again. This was premium content for her followers. My hilarious son has the best roasts. My mother said nothing. She just watched, her expression unreadable, a silent accomplice to the casual destruction of my feelings. It was happening in slow motion. Dylan, emboldened by his father's approval, ran towards the fireplace. I shot up from my seat, lunging for him, but I was too slow. With a triumphant whoop, he threw the silver locket into the heart of the flames. I screamed. It was an involuntary, guttural sound of pure anguish. The small, beautiful piece of art, my promise to myself, landed amongst the glowing logs. For a second, it shone brightly, and then the silver began to warp and blacken. And then the worst part, they laughed. It wasn't just a chuckle. It was a full-throated, unrestrained roar of laughter. John was wiping tears from his eyes. Megan was bent over, shaking with mirth. Even my mother, my own mother, had a wide, terrible smile on her face as she watched the fire consume my gift. In that moment, something inside me broke. It was a clean, sharp snap. The part of me that had spent 34 years craving their love, their approval, their basic human decency, it just died. It turned to ash right there with my locket. I looked at their laughing faces, contorted with glee at my pain, and I finally saw them for what they were. They weren't just thoughtless or unkind. They were cruel. They enjoyed this. They fed on it. Dylan looked at me, his chest puffed out with pride, and delivered the line his father had so clearly fed him. "Dad said you're just a failure who deserves nothing anyway." The laughter in the room died down, replaced by a smug, satisfied silence. John nodded in approval. Imogen looked away, a flicker of something, maybe shame, maybe inconvenience, crossing her face before it was gone. I stood there, frozen, the heat from the fire on my face, a cold emptiness spreading through my chest. I didn't cry. I didn't shout. I didn't say a single word. I turned, walked to the door, picked up my purse, and left. The sound of their renewed, confused chatter followed me out into the cold night air, but I didn't hear it. I heard nothing but the roaring in my own ears. I got in my car, and as I drove away from that house for the last time, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. They had just lit a fire, but it wasn't the one in the hearth. The drive back to my condo was a blur. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles were white. The silence in the car was absolute, a stark contrast to the cacophony of laughter and cruelty replaying in my head on a loop. A failure who deserves nothing. The words echoed, each one a hammer blow to the fractured pieces of my self-worth. When I got home, I didn't turn on the lights. I walked through the darkness to my living room window and stared out at the city lights, feeling as distant and as cold as the stars. For hours, I just stood there, processing not just the events of the evening, but the reality of my entire life. Every belittling comment, every dismissive gesture, every joke at my expense, it all coalesced into a single, ugly truth. They didn't love me. They tolerated me as long as I knew my place, which was somewhere far beneath them. My phone had been silent. No calls, no texts, no "are you okay?" or "we're sorry." Of course not. In their narrative, I was the one who had overreacted. I was the one who couldn't take a joke. I was the problem. Around 11 p.m., my phone buzzed. And then it buzzed again and again, a flurry of notifications. I picked it up, my heart sinking. It was the family group chat, a digital space I usually kept muted. My brother had created a new group. The title was Family. I saw the notification. "John has added Imogen, Megan." Then, a moment later, "John has removed Daisy from the group." It was so petty, so juvenile, it would have been laughable if it didn't hurt so much. He had created a new group just to ceremoniously kick me out. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed with a direct message, but it was in a new group text, this one including me. It was from John, clearly a message he had first workshopped in the real family chat. The text read, "Since you can't handle a simple family joke and had to run off like a dramatic child, we've all decided it's for the best. You're officially cut out of everything. No more holidays, no more birthdays, no more financial support. Don't contact Mom. Don't contact me or my family. We're done with your constant negativity." My mother, Imogen, immediately replied with a single, brutal thumbs-up emoji. Megan followed with a heart emoji. It was a digital execution, swift and unanimous. No more financial support. The line was so absurd, so completely detached from reality, that it jolted me out of my grief and into a cold, clarifying rage. Financial support? I was the one who had been quietly propping them up for years. I was the one who paid for my mother's emergency roof repair last winter. I was the one who loaned John $5,000 for a down payment on his fancy new car, money I knew I'd never see again. I was the one who set up and contributed to an education fund for Dylan. They weren't supporting me. I was their unacknowledged safety net. I stared at the message, the words blurring through the anger. "You're officially cut out of everything." A strange sense of calm washed over me. This wasn't a punishment. It was a release. They had just handed me the key to my own cage and told me to get out. They thought they were taking everything from me, but in reality, they were giving me the one thing I desperately needed: permission to be done. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I could have listed every financial contribution, every sacrifice I'd made. I could have screamed at them through the screen, but I realized that would be playing their game. They wanted a fight. They wanted drama. They wanted to be able to screenshot my hysterical response and show it to each other as proof of my instability. I wouldn't give them the satisfaction. Instead, I thought about the biggest secret I held, the biggest piece of leverage I had over their comfortable, entitled lives. I thought about the house. My father, a shrewd man who saw his son's recklessness and his wife's financial illiteracy, had made some very specific arrangements before he passed away 10 years ago. Imogen was allowed to live in the house for the rest of her life, but the ownership, the deed itself, was a more complicated matter. And I, the quiet, responsible failure of a daughter, was the executor of his will and the keeper of his financial legacy. With a steadiness that surprised me, I typed out a short, simple reply. I read it over once, a small, grim smile touching my lips for the first time all night. It was perfect. I hit send. My message appeared in the group chat, a stark contrast to their emotional pronouncements. It said, "Good, check whose name owns the house you live in." I sent the message, and then I put my phone on silent and placed it face down on the counter. I didn't want to see their immediate, panicked responses. I knew they would come. For the first time in my life, I had not just refused to accept my designated role, I had flipped the entire board over. I had reminded them that the stage they performed their little plays on was a stage I owned. I walked into my bedroom, the rage and hurt now replaced by a chilling, resolute clarity. I had spent my life building a career on understanding value, assets, and leverage. I had managed multi-million-dollar portfolios for strangers with precision and skill. It was time, I realized, to finally manage my own. The silence in my apartment was no longer lonely. It was powerful. It was the calm before a storm I had just unleashed. And I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that their world was about to be turned completely upside down. 10 minutes later, I happened to glance at my phone. The screen was lit up, vibrating nonstop on the granite countertop. Dozens of missed calls from John, dozens from my mother, a frantic string of texts. The silence was over. The panic had begun. I let the phone vibrate itself into silence. Each buzz was a small, satisfying jolt, a signal of their world tilting on its axis. I didn't pick it up. I didn't read the texts. Their panic was a dish I wanted to serve cold, and for that I needed to be methodical. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm, feeling a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. The grief was still there, a dull ache beneath my ribs, but it was overshadowed by a steely resolve. They had declared war, armed with insults and emojis. I would respond with facts, figures, and legal documents. My profession had trained me for this. I spent my days sifting through complex financial histories, finding patterns, and assessing value. It was time to conduct a full audit of my family. I made coffee, opened my laptop, and pulled up the encrypted folder on my personal drive labeled Family Estate. My father was a meticulous man. He knew my brother's impulsive nature and my mother's tendency to be swayed by John's charismatic bullying. Before he died from a sudden heart attack, he had sat me down, and only me, to go over his will and his finances. "Your mother can live in the house as long as she wants," he had told me, his voice serious. "But Daisy, the house is not hers to sell or borrow against. I've put it in a trust. You are the trustee. After she's gone, it's yours, not John's. He would sell it for a sports car in a week." He had made me promise to look after Imogen, but he had also given me the tools to protect myself. The ownership of the family home was legally and indisputably transferred into a revocable trust, with me as the sole trustee and primary beneficiary upon my mother's passing. She had lifetime tenancy, a right to live there, but she held zero equity. She was, in legal terms, a tenant in a house I controlled. They had forgotten this, or perhaps John, in his arrogance, had assumed it was a detail he could bulldoze over later. My father had passed 10 years ago, and for a decade, I had silently upheld my end of the bargain. I managed the trust, paid the property taxes from its account, an account I also personally supplemented when funds were low, and handled any major repairs. They simply lived there, enjoying the benefits without any of the responsibility, all while calling me a failure. The audit began with the house. I pulled up the tax records, the maintenance invoices, the insurance payments. I had receipts for everything. The $15,000 for the new roof, the $5,000 for the furnace replacement, the $2,000 for the emergency plumbing work. All paid for by me, either directly or through the trust I managed. Next, I moved on to John. My father had left him a modest inheritance in stocks, which I knew for a fact he had cashed out and burned through within 2 years. But my own loans to him were another story. I opened a spreadsheet and began to itemize. The $5,000 for his car. The $2,000 to cover his credit card debt 6 years ago. The countless times I'd covered a $300 or $400 bill for him with the casual excuse, "Just pay me back when you can." I had the bank transfers, the Venmo history, the text messages where he'd promised to repay me. It all added up to just over $11,000. It wasn't a life-changing amount of money for me now, but it was the principle. He had called me a drain on the family's finances while actively siphoning off my own. Then there was Megan. I had helped her set up the LLC for her influencer business 5 years ago, waiving my usual consultation fee. I had reviewed the first brand contract she was offered, pointing out clauses that would have allowed the company to underpay her, saving her thousands. Her thank you had been a single, breezy text. After that, she treated my professional expertise as a free resource, often calling me with frantic questions about taxes or business expenses. I had no financial claims against her, but I made a note of the hours of free professional advice I had given her. The final column in my audit was for my mother. This one was the most painful. I loved her, or at least, I loved the idea of the mother she could have been. The financial support I gave her was more subtle. I had her on my premium cell phone plan. I paid for the streaming services she used. When she complained about rising grocery prices, I started having a weekly box of high-quality groceries delivered to her home, pretending it was a promotion from a new service. It cost me over $400 a month. By midday, I had a comprehensive dossier. It was a cold, hard, factual account of my role in the family, not as a failure or a participant, but as their silent benefactor. The spreadsheets and documents painted a clear picture. They were not holding me up, they were standing on my shoulders. Armed with this information, I finally looked at my phone. It was a mess, over 50 missed calls, a flood of texts. John's texts started with anger. "What is this garbage about the house? Dad left it to Mom. Stop playing games." Then they moved to panic. "Daisy, call me. The county records website is confusing. What did Dad do?" And finally to pleading, "Okay, fine, you're the trustee, I get it. But you can't kick Mom out. Call me right now." My mothers were more manipulative. "Daisy, I don't know what game you're playing, but you are causing your brother a great deal of stress. Your father would be so disappointed in you. Then, after all I've done for you, this is how you repay me, by threatening to make me homeless." There was no apology, no remorse for what happened at my birthday, only accusations and victimhood. I didn't reply to any of them. Instead, I picked up the phone and made a call to the one person I knew would help me navigate this with tactical precision. "Sarah, hi," I said when she answered. "It's Daisy. I need a lawyer." Sarah was an old friend from college who had become one of the city's sharpest real estate and contract lawyers. She was pragmatic, unflappable, and had a very low tolerance for bullies. When I met her at her downtown office the next afternoon, I didn't waste time with small talk. I laid everything out on her conference table: the trust documents for the house, the printouts of my financial spreadsheet, the screenshots of the group text. I told her the whole story, from the plastic trophy to the locket in the fire, finishing with John's "You're officially cut out" text. She listened patiently, her expression hardening as the story unfolded. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment, her fingers steepled under her chin. "Daisy," she said finally, her voice calm but edged with steel. "These people are not your family. They are parasites, and you've been the host." It was brutal, but it was exactly what I needed to hear. "So what do we do?" I asked, my voice steady. They think they hold all the cards, they think they've exiled me, but based on this, she tapped the trust document, they're living in your house, you have all the power here. Sarah explained my legal position with crystal clarity. My mother's right to live in the house was a lifetime tenancy, but it wasn't unconditional. The trust document, drafted by my savvy father, included a standard but crucial clause. The property must be maintained in good condition, and the lifetime tenant could not cause or permit waste or significant damage to the asset. Furthermore, my role as trustee gave me the authority to inspect the property to ensure the terms of the trust were being met. As for the money John owes you, Sarah continued, the amount is significant enough to pursue in small claims court. The text messages where he acknowledges the debts are your proof. It's a slam dunk, but it can be messy. We discussed strategy. A long, drawn-out court battle was not what I wanted. I didn't want revenge in that way. I wanted a clean break. I wanted peace. I wanted them to understand unequivocally the consequences of their actions. Sarah proposed a multi-pronged approach. First, we would address the issue of the house. Second, we would address the personal loans to John. We'll send a formal letter, she said, a glint in her eye. Not an emotional email, but a legal document from my office. It will be cold, professional, and non-negotiable. It will inform them of the legal reality of their situation. People like your brother, who rely on bluster and intimidation, fold when they're confronted with structured, legal authority. For the next hour, we drafted the letter. It was a masterpiece of legal precision. The first section clearly outlined the terms of the trust, citing the specific clauses from my father's will. It stated that I, as trustee, would be conducting a formal inspection of the property within 30 days to assess its current condition, as was my legal right. This served two purposes. It established my authority, and it was a clear signal that the days of them treating the property as their own were over. The second section was addressed to John. It was a formal demand for the repayment of the $11,350 he owed me. The letter included an itemized list of the loans, with dates, and stated that he had 30 days to repay the full amount or we would proceed with legal action. The third and final section was perhaps the most important. It was a formal cease and desist. It demanded that they stop all forms of contact with me, no calls, no texts, no emails, no showing up at my home or office. Any further communication would have to go through Sarah's law firm. This was me, formally accepting their declaration that I was cut out and turning it into a legally binding reality on my own terms. Sarah read the final draft aloud. It was perfect, impersonal, factual, and utterly devastating to the narrative they had constructed for themselves. It stripped away all their perceived power and laid the truth bare. Before she sent it, Sarah looked at me. "Are you sure, Daisy? Once we send this, there's no going back. This is the point of no return." I thought of the locket melting in the fire. I thought of their laughter. I thought of the words, "A failure who deserves nothing." "I'm sure," I said, a wave of calm washing over me. "Send it." Sarah printed the letter on her firm's official letterhead, signed it, and had it sent via courier to my mother's house, with an additional copy sent via registered mail to ensure they couldn't claim they never received it. The rest of the day was quiet. I went home and for the first time I blocked their numbers. John, Imogen, Megan, all of them. I didn't need to see their frantic messages anymore. I had said everything I needed to say in that letter. The next afternoon, I got a single email from Sarah. The subject line was, "They received it." The body of the email was short. "The courier has confirmed delivery. My office phone has been ringing off the hook for the past hour. My receptionist is logging the calls as per our instruction. The message has been sent." I felt a profound sense of relief. The ball was no longer in my court. I had taken control. The letter wasn't just a legal document, it was my declaration of independence. It was the sound of a door slamming shut on a lifetime of disrespect. Now, all I had to do was wait for them to realize that the person they had locked out was the one who held the key. The 30 days that followed the delivery of Sarah's letter were a study in escalating panic, all of it filtered through my lawyer. As instructed, I maintained complete silence. Their numbers remained blocked, their emails routed to a junk folder I never checked. Sarah's office became the sole conduit, and she provided me with daily summaries that read like a comedy of desperation. The first week was dominated by John. He called Sarah's office a dozen times a day, his tone shifting from outrage to bargaining. He tried to argue that my father's will couldn't be right. He demanded a copy of the trust document, which Sarah calmly provided, as was his right. The silence that followed for 2 days after he received it was telling. He had clearly taken it to his own lawyer, who had undoubtedly confirmed the grim reality. The document was ironclad. My mother, Imogen, tried a different tactic. She left long, tearful voicemails for Sarah, painting herself as the elderly, heartbroken mother being tormented by her cruel, ungrateful daughter. She spoke of her health, her age, how the stress was unbearable. She completely ignored the events of my birthday, framing my actions as a sudden and inexplicable attack. Megan took to social media. While she never mentioned me by name, she posted a series of vague, passive-aggressive stories about toxic family members and the pain of being cut off by someone you love. Her followers flooded her with sympathy, unaware that the someone she loved was currently funding the very lifestyle she was broadcasting. Sarah advised me to ignore it all. "It's noise," she said. "They are throwing everything at the wall to see what sticks. Don't engage. Stick to the plan." The plan was the inspection. On the 30th day, as stipulated in the letter, Sarah and I, accompanied by a licensed home inspector, arrived at the house. I hadn't been back since my birthday, and pulling into the driveway felt surreal. My mother and John were waiting on the porch. The moment I stepped out of the car, the performance began. "Daisy, thank God," my mother cried, rushing towards me with her arms outstretched. I flinched and took a step back, positioning myself slightly behind Sarah. My mother's arms fell to her sides, her face a mask of wounded confusion. John was less theatrical. His face was a thundercloud of resentment. "What is this, Daisy? Are you really going to kick your own mother out onto the street?" he snarled. Sarah stepped forward, holding up a hand. "Good morning, John Imogen," she said, her voice crisp and professional. "As you know from my letter, we are here to conduct a trustee's inspection of the property. We will be as efficient as possible. Mr. Henderson here is a certified inspector." John looked at the inspector, then back at me, his eyes filled with hate. "This is a joke. You're enjoying this, aren't you?" I met his gaze, and for the first time, he saw no fear, no pleading, no desperation. Just a calm, quiet emptiness. I said nothing. My silence was more powerful than any argument I could have made. It told him he had no more power over me. The inspection was revealing. The house was not in good condition. Years of neglect were evident. There was a damp patch on a ceiling from a leaky pipe they'd never bothered to fix. Several windows had broken seals. The back deck had rotting boards. The inspector took meticulous notes and photos. John and Imogen followed us from room to room, their commentary a mix of excuses and accusations. "That's just normal wear and tear," John would insist. "Your father never would have wanted you to be so cold-hearted," Imogen would whisper, loud enough for me to hear. Throughout the 2-hour inspection, I remained silent, a detached observer. This house, a place of so many unhappy memories, was no longer a home to me. It was an asset, a line item on a balance sheet. The emotional connection had been severed, burned away with the locket. After the inspector was done, Sarah and I stood with them in the living room. The fireplace was clean and empty. The inspector's report will be ready in a few days, Sarah announced. "It's clear there are several points of significant neglect that breach the terms of the trust. Daisy, as trustee, has a legal obligation to protect the asset from further damage." "So what does that mean?" John demanded. "It means," Sarah said, looking directly at Imogen, "that your lifetime tenancy is contingent on the property being properly maintained. We will be sending a list of mandatory repairs. If they are not completed in a timely manner, we will have to explore other options to protect the trust." Imogen finally broke. "You can't do this. This is my home." "The trust owns this home, Imogen," Sarah corrected her gently. "And Daisy is the trustee. The responsibility falls to her." I finally spoke, my voice even and low. "John," I said, turning to my brother, The deadline for the repayment of your loan was yesterday. I have not received payment. Sarah will be filing the paperwork for small claims court on Monday. His face went pale. He had assumed it was a bluff. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. He had nothing left to say. We turned and walked out. As we drove away, I didn't look back. I had seen everything I needed to see. They had finally understood. This wasn't a family squabble. This was a liquidation. They had treated me like a disposable part of their lives, and I was now, quite literally, disposing of the assets. They had cut me out, and now I was cutting them off. The locks on the house hadn't been changed yet, but the locks on my life had, and they were never, ever getting a key again. The fallout was swift and decisive. The official inspector's report was damning, estimating over $30,000 in necessary repairs to fix the long-term neglect. Sarah sent a formal notice to my mother, giving her 60 days to begin rectifying the issues. Simultaneously, she filed the small claims suit against John. Faced with a legal pincer movement, the threat of losing his mother's free housing and a court date he couldn't possibly win, John's arrogance finally shattered, replaced by a desperate, sputtering rage. He tried to rally other family members, aunts and uncles, painting me as a vindictive monster. But when Sarah, at my direction, shared the trust documents and a summary of the situation with a few key relatives, the support he expected evaporated. They saw the legal truth and the history of my financial support, and they quietly backed away, not wanting to get caught in the blast zone. My mother, unable to afford the repairs and with John unable to help her, was left with no options. Through her lawyer, she proposed a settlement. She would voluntarily relinquish her lifetime tenancy and vacate the property in exchange for me dropping the repair requirements and providing her with a small stipend to help her secure an apartment. Sarah and I discussed it. It was more than she deserved, but it was also the cleanest, quickest path to a final resolution. I had no desire to be her landlord or to oversee a massive renovation project from afar. I wanted the house sold. I wanted the chapter closed. I agreed with one condition. The stipend would last for 2 years, giving her ample time to get on her feet, and every payment would be accompanied by a receipt acknowledging it was a gift, not an obligation. I wanted no ambiguity that this was my final act of familial duty, not a continuing entitlement. John, facing the reality of a court judgment that would tarnish his credit and professional reputation, also caved. He agreed to a payment plan for the money he owed me, a humiliating but necessary concession. The first payment of $500 arrived in my bank account a week later. It felt less like a victory and more like a sad, overdue invoice finally being paid. 3 months after my disastrous birthday party, I stood in the empty living room of my childhood home. The movers had come and gone, taking all of my mother's possessions to her new, small apartment across town. The house was hollow, echoing with every footstep. The walls were bare, showing faint outlines where pictures had hung for decades. I walked over to the fireplace. It was cold and dark. I thought of the silver locket, my promise to myself, melting in the flames. It felt like a lifetime ago. Standing there in the silence, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel anger anymore. I felt light. The heavy weight of their expectations, their judgment, their casual cruelty, it was gone. The house itself seemed to breathe a sigh of relief alongside me. It was just a structure of wood and nails, waiting for a new family, a new life. I had hired a real estate agent, and the for sale sign was already on the front lawn. In the current market, the house would sell quickly, and the proceeds, as my father had intended, would be mine. It was a significant sum, enough to supercharge my investments, to travel, to do whatever I wanted. It was freedom, bought at a terrible price, but freedom nonetheless. My relationship with my family is over. I have not spoken to my mother, brother, or Megan since that day of the inspection. I hear snippets through the grapevine. My mother is struggling to adjust to apartment living, complaining about the noise and the lack of a garden. John and Megan are under financial strain, having to actually pay their own way without my quiet subsidy. Megan's lifestyle blog has a decidedly more bitter tone these days. Sometimes, a wave of sadness washes over me for the family I wish I'd had. But then I remember the laughter. I remember the plastic trophy. I remember the words, "You're just a failure who deserves nothing." And I know I made the right choice. They didn't just cut me out of their lives, they liberated me from mine. A few weeks ago, I booked a flight. A one-way ticket to Italy, the first stop on a year-long trip around the world. I also bought myself a new locket. It's silver with a map of the world engraved on it. It's not a replacement for the one I lost. It's a testament to the one I found, myself.